Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Clow. I am the head of creative technologies at the University of Albany Libraries.
And I'm Abby Adams. I am one of the subject librarians here.
And we're here today to talk about our new video game collection that we recently developed in conjunction with a brand new program here at the university for game design and development. And kind of some of the steps we took, problems we encountered because things were not nearly as easy as we had hoped they would be based on our previous library experience.
So we're going to talk about some of the major challenges that we faced, how we addressed them by, in part, going to other libraries to see what they had done with a lot of the more established collections, where they had been working with video games and academic libraries for years, how they dealt with some of those problems, what worked for them, what would work for us, and then some of the challenges that still remain that nobody has quite sorted out yet. So one of the first ones was just getting people on board with justifying us spending money on this collection. Even the game design program itself ran into a few challenges with this, where people were pushing back on video games are not considered academic, or they're not good for students, and so there was a lot of pushback from a lot of different places. And we found that in the libraries as well, where there was questions about, is this really the best use of our money? Are we pulling away from other more valid academic collections? So we needed to deal with some of those negative perceptions around whether games counted as being adequately academic. We needed to support the new program, which is always a bit of a challenge, in allocating the money and shifting some funds around. We wanted to talk about providing entertainment options for students, because if we were going to have games, they were going to use them to play for fun. And so there were some discussions around, is that the role of an academic library, especially with students living on campus, and to what degree do we want to be involved in that? And then one of the biggest things was talking about how to support shifts in broader pedagogy and trends toward experiential learning. So not just video games, but there are other elements involved, like graphic novels or more just hands-on activities in libraries and in the classroom, and how we can use the video game collection to support that, and how we can use video games to support not just programming in the gaming industry, but narrative design, art, music, alternatives even for non-game classes that just want to use those for experiential learning. And so those were some of the challenges that we ran into and some of the questions that we had to answer.
So we talked to other libraries and figured out how they were handling it. And there was a few different points that we really wanted to focus on. How they were supporting academic programs utilizing the collections. How programs on their campus are using games and the study of games as an academic field as opposed to other content within the games. If they were catering to an interest in entertainment options, and then how the usage of the collection was validating their choice and or informing it. So we bought games. We took those bits of feedback and those answers, and we collaborated with faculty here on campus, not only in the game design and development program, which had more of an interest in classic games and a lineage of games as an art form, but then we also spoke to some English, history, more humanities level classes and looked to games that dealt with subject matter or other content that can be delivered to their students in a way that is not dissimilar from film. And there's a lot of questions, but once we got people on board, we started to see a lot more movement, and we started to be able to think about answers in a way that we hadn't before.
So the next challenge we ran into was pretty practical. The first one was a little bit more in the philosophy behind the academy, and then once we actually got clearance to purchase games, then we started to answer questions about how are we cataloging them, how are we buying them, where are we putting them. And that was that was a little bit unexpected because we thought it would be similar enough to book buying or, buying DVDs. And we ran into a lot of things that were more challenging than we anticipated. And this was where talking to some of the other libraries was really, really helpful. Like the picture on the last slide, that was from the University of North Texas. And so they were able to give us a lot of details about here's how we handled those elements. So if you're starting up a game program, I definitely recommend you talk to the librarians who've been doing this for a while. In dealing with cataloging, we pulled in one of our main catalogers. And so she handled a lot of that aspect for us. But in terms of getting the games into our actual catalog, it was mostly copy cataloging that was pretty easily done. But then we ran into some issues with pulling in graphics because we wanted the students to be able to go online into our catalog and see the games. But we needed to differentiate a little bit from, like, we have a book about Animal Crossing, and then we have the game Animal Crossing. And so we were trying to make sure that they were just visually distinct. And so we had to go in separately and put in the images of the games themselves, which was an unexpected time suck that was involved in getting everything up and running. And then just dealing with, okay, where are we putting it in the building, and how are we indicating that within the catalog? And so those were some unexpected challenges, but we were able to deal with that and overcome it. We made a curated collection, which is shown on the slide, so that students can go in and very easily browse. Here are the games that are available. Here's what they look like. Here's the consoles that they're on. So they don't necessarily have to know what they're looking for or go into the full catalog to see what games we have. And then we're still dealing with some questions around vendors and purchasing. We got a lot of the original stuff from Amazon. And right now we're in the process of setting up relationships with local vendors so that we can, build those local community relations, that we don't have to rely on Amazon. But the major library vendors don't sell video games. It's just not a resource that they address at all. And so we're figuring out how to handle some of the logistics in, a big bureaucracy like the SUNY system. It's not easy to set up new vendors. And so that has been an ongoing challenge that we're still working on. And then we had to make decisions about loaning the equipment, managing the equipment long-term, where to put it, and that kind of stuff.
But so again, we looked to how other libraries handled it. And if there's 100 libraries we talked to, there's 102 different ways that we learned about how to provide access. So some places relied on emulators. Obviously, there is complications with lending and copyright and providing digital access to a resource that, again, we'll talk about a little bit later. PC games, likewise, are almost exclusively, especially now, digital born and don't have any physical releases. So even though we have a space with gaming computers in the library, providing access to titles was impossible or is impossible as it currently stands because of the way that DRM works with those titles. And then a lot of places kept their equipment in-house and had dedicated space for games and playing, and then liaisoned and collaborated with classes to use the stuff. So that's more or less where we are right now. We're kind of working on the details. We have games, we have consoles, and that's about it because, we are, that's easy to do. I mean, even then, not too easy because there was some cataloging difficulties.
Yeah, and there were games that people wanted. We had several requests for Baldur's Gate, and we just can't get a hold of it for any kind of reasonable cost or a legal way. It's just not viable right now.
Which is, I thought was particularly, surprising. I didn't realize it's one of the biggest games to have come out and did not receive a physical release until it was a special edition, and it's very expensive. And that was a game that was specifically asked for by the program, that the game development program that we currently can't offer in an easy way. And so that, unfortunately, there's no Canopy or Canopy equivalent for video games for libraries to utilize. So, yeah, it's been a little bit of a eye-opening experience for sure.
Yeah, so if any vendor wants to jump on that, there is absolutely a market.
And give us a call.
Yes. So the third challenge that we ran into, once we were past at least kind of the initial hurdles of acquiring the games and getting them out, was making sure that they were accessible and making some decisions on what that accessibility was going to look like. So we had to decide, we are a state university. Most of what we have is to some degree available to the public. People can come in and they can use our books, they can use our computers and our resources. And so we had to determine, is the game collection going to be available to the general public, or are we keeping this much more limited to strictly students? And so we went back and forth on that. That's something that we talked to the other schools about, and ultimately we did decide, at least for the moment, this is strictly going to be for our students. We wanted to make sure that we could provide access to the consoles, because if we just have the games, students still need a way to play them. It's not a standalone resource. And so, a lot of students can't afford consoles, don't have consoles, and so we tried to come up with ways that we could provide access or ensure that they had access through other means on campus. We had to figure out where things went, which that ended up just being a very long conversation about where to stick a shelf, ultimately. And so that's a picture of our shelf on the slide. I don't know long term if that's going to stay there or not. But still, just putting things in, deciding what goes where, what takes up floor space, what takes up some of the more visible areas in the library. There's a lot of competition for those spots. And so we're making decisions, not just about the video games, but kind of holistically within the library about what do we want to draw student attention with and what do we want to highlight as part of our collection. And then once we had the shelf in place and we had the games, we had to let students know about it. And we had to let faculty know that, we've been talking about this, but now we have it. And so you can come use it. Here's what it involves. Here's what it doesn't involve. We didn't want to suggest that we have access to Baldur's Gate when we don't, or that we have access to these PC games that students want that we can't offer right now. And so we're trying to make it exciting and fun and interesting, but also not be too misleading in terms of the limits of our collection and the size of our collection right now. Because at the moment, it's not all that big.
So continuing on access, we had to set up policies and procedures. How are patrons getting a hold of this stuff? So lending of the lending of the games themselves is pretty straightforward. But the consoles needed some additional kind of thinking. We had a workflow in place that's mostly focused on cameras, audio equipment, and other creative tools. But we weren't dealing with possible patron information before, so we had to set up a workflow where if a student, which is a patron in general, uses a PS5 and they bring it back, how are we making sure that if they entered into their account or signed in anything, that we're protecting that? We had to set up a workflow and a lag time between loans, so that way something couldn't immediately go back out before we had a chance to make sure it was good. We have a cleaning process, make sure everything's fixed. We run updates on a weekly basis. We had to register the MAC addresses of each device with our Information Technology Services Department. There was just a lot of hurdles that came with consoles that we weren't kind of dealing with prior. But we wanted to make sure that these things were accessible because consoles are expensive, and because we couldn't necessarily provide access on PCs. Like if a student, a lot of students in the program have their own gaming PCs to work on, so they kind of naturally, I think, are PC gamers. And because we couldn't provide access there, we needed to make sure we're providing access to the consoles, because they might not necessarily have one as their main kind of place where they're playing. Additionally, something that I really wanted to make sure we had were additional controller types because looking at some older games, and one of the things we focused on when buying titles was a lot of like classic collections. And so if a faculty member is assigning the Sonic collection, we wanted to make sure that we had a Genesis equivalent controller to kind of give game design students looking at how a game and a controller are designed together and or relate to one another, the closest possible way to experience that. We can't necessarily bring a Pac-Man arcade machine in, though, maybe someday. But we can provide the Nintendo Switch, the Pac-Man collection, and an arcade-style controller, so they get the closest kind of next best thing. And then, our plans to retain older media or unique media is kind of what we're exploring right now. But the outcome in general is we have this stuff, it's available, people are using it, people are excited, and it's really cool.
So some of the positives, now that we've been talking about challenges for a bit, we had a win just in getting the collection started. We weren't sure at the beginning if we were going to be able to get the funding or make all the logistics work, but we have it. They're being checked out. And in setting up that collection, we got to work with a lot of different departments and faculty, and that was a really good experience in terms of getting all those different perspectives and what people wanted and why, and being able to work to select games that was going to meet all of those needs in a pretty cool way in terms of new pedagogies and experiential learning. And so that was really neat to work on, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that in the future. It's been very popular with the students. And very popular with the game design departments, the faculty as well. We've gotten a lot of good feedback from them. We've had a lot of positive collaborations with other librarians, both internally and some of the other libraries that we talk to, other people who are involved in the game industry. And so that's been really cool, being able to make some of those inroads. And again, something I'm kind of looking forward to is working with the local vendors and building more of those relationships as we start getting in some of the legacy media and the retro consoles. This is also paired really well with some other kind of concurrent initiatives in the library on non-traditional media, expanded pedagogies, other options for students beyond sort of the traditional, we offer books in the library, we're supporting your essay writing, and we're still continuing to do those things, but we're expanding our offerings. As technology grows and as the world changes. And so this has paired really, really well with that. And so we're able to say to students, hey, we've got all of these new things and list the game collection as part of it, which I think makes us a little bit more appealing or accessible to students, that we're not just the scary library that's full of old dusty books and, grumpy shushing librarians.
And I think it makes us, to some faculty, a bit more engaging as well. I kind of spoke a little bit about my main role as the creative technologies department head, but a big part of, or kind of talked a little bit about how we have a focus on experiential learning, and a lot of faculty might be interested in trying some of these tools out or expanding, but they might not know the best way to kind of approach it or talk about it, and especially as you get into more humanities-based disciplines that aren't necessarily dealing with the creation or like the tech side of things, but more about what would you say, the cultural side of games or the content of games. Though there have been conversations about, I just had a conversation with an English class that was interested in, possibly doing some text-based game design as an assignment in the space, and that's directly linked to some text-based games and game designers doing that work already.
Yeah, and I was able to have, I think, to a degree, kind of the opposite experiences. I'm usually on the book buying side, and so we have a harder time drawing in a lot of the STEM faculty. And so in getting some of the things alongside of the games themselves, like the O'Reilly database, or just in reaching out to ask about console support, we were able to involve like the computer science faculty and the informatics faculty in a way that they hadn't really been interested before. And I think now they're a lot more involved with knowing what's in the library, what they can assign their students to use in the library, and working with us with their classes. So that's been a really positive element. And probably my favorite thing was we got a formal student comment to the circulation department that whoever picked out the games had great taste. And I am just unreasonably pleased about that because we picked out the games.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's something that's, we're also doing our part to change some wrong conceptions of libraries. But, we grew up with video games. A lot of our fellow librarians here, and I'm sure everywhere, grew up with video games because we're just of that age, and I found with class visits talking about, we have this, my favorite comment is someone said, whoever made this knows ball, which I am also very pleased by. Students like seeing clear examples of people knowing the types of games that are culturally important, gameplay important, or just important in general. Like they can tell.
Yeah, and that's, I think, an area where often academic libraries struggle to make those connections with students, because when we were selecting the games, we weren't picking games that were popular or games that were going to make the students happy. We were trying to pick games that were going to support our academic collection, that were going to be useful to the game design program. And so the fact that we were able to do that and also pick games at the same time that the students were really excited to play or to see was very gratifying.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, you can think about it in the same way you think about film or a great novel. Media can do both. It can be important and engage with important topics or be academically interesting while also being
fun.
really engaging and fun. And I think that's the best games do that, and that's kind of, because there are some games that are very, I don't want to say, maybe more strictly academic that we maybe didn't get. So there's a balance there, but it's just like any other medium. And I think treating it like any other medium that is currently within the libraries makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. So coming into the future, what are we doing? Maintaining the collection is a bear. It's going to take a lot of space, money. Money is the big one. A lot of space, money, and time. And we need to figure out an approach for those indie games, how to get PC games, especially for the game design development students. PC games, I think, are going to be really important because or just digital games in general. I shouldn't say PC, because some of these games are also on consoles. The issue being that they're digital born, they may never have a physical release, and they're not terribly expensive titles, but they're hugely influential in the gaming space and in driving games forward as an art form. There's a lot of titles that we just are not seeing released physically. Some of the more popular ones are Hollow Knight's a great example. We do have the physical version of Hollow Knight, but that took a few years, I think, before it kind of reached that critical acclaim enough to warrant a physical release. And this is not a new problem, but unfortunately, no solution has come up yet. We also are wondering where board games and tabletop RPGs fit in. We have Dungeons and Dragons, Player's Handbook, the core rule books. And I think right now they're just shelved with other kind of books on game design as opposed to with the games themselves. And how does that make sense? There's other, do we, along with consoles, equipment, do we purchase tabletop game accessories? We have a makerspace where we can make certain things, but do we supply dice, DM screens? Are these things that there's room to expand? And just any other unexpected challenges where there's no clear best practice, no clear model, and in some ways that's kind of fun and nice, but in other ways that's scary, because I don't know if I trust myself, or if you should trust me to make up the best practices.
Yeah, that's something we learned in talking to all those other libraries, is they all largely kind of did what worked best for them. Then there are certain legal bounds that nobody can cross, in terms of copyright and access. But seeing that on the one hand, it kind of gives us the freedom to go, okay, well, what's going to work for you, Albany? But on the other, there's no checklist to follow. We're all making this up as we go. And this is, as you're saying, this isn't a new consideration. Games have been in academic libraries to some degree for going on 15 years now. And we still don't have solutions to some of this, and we still don't have best practices for some of this. So this is definitely still an evolving area, even though it's not necessarily a new area right now.
Yeah. A lot of adaptations are needed, and because everything is so, I think to your point, can be very specific to the institution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and we will now go to the live Q&A part.
See you there.